What happens when a member of the royal family thinks they can waltz onto late-night television and lecture America about their own country? In just 37 seconds, Prince Harry went from smug royal guest to persona non grata, getting himself kicked off Greg Gutfeld's show in the most spectacular fashion anyone had ever witnessed. Picture this. The Fox News studio lights are blazing hot. Greg Gutfeld sits behind his familiar desk, that trademark smirk playing across his face as he prepares to welcome his next guest. Tonight's show promised to be different. Tonight, they had royalty. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex himself, had agreed to appear on the Greg Gutfeld show to discuss his latest charitable endeavors and his life in America. The audience buzzed with anticipation. Here was a real prince, sitting right there in Studio 6. Greg adjusted his tie and looked directly into camera 2. Welcome back to the Greg Gutfeld Show. I'm your host, Greg Gutfeld, and boy, do we have a treat for you tonight. Joining me now is Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, here to talk about his new life in California and his upcoming projects. Prince Harry, welcome to the show. Harry shifted in his chair, already looking uncomfortable under the bright studio lights. He wore a crisp navy suit, but his posture suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Thank you for having me, Greg, though I must say, this isn't quite the format I'm used to. Greg's eyebrows shot up slightly. Oh, really? Well, we like to keep things casual here. Speaking of casual, I have to ask about your transition from royal duties to Hollywood life. That's quite a leap, isn't it? I wouldn't call it Hollywood life, Harry replied, his voice taking on a defensive edge. My wife and I are focused on meaningful work, on making a real difference in the world. Something Americans might not fully understand, given your country's rather limited perspective on global issues. The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators exchanged glances. Greg's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, though now it carried a different energy entirely. Limited perspective? Greg leaned forward slightly. That's interesting, coming from someone who grew up in a palace and never held a real job until he was, 35 years old? Harry's face flushed red. I served in the military. I served my country with distinction. I've seen combat. I've seen real suffering. Have you, Greg? Have you ever put your life on the line for anything meaningful? Actually, yes, Greg replied calmly. I put my reputation on the line every night, bringing Americans honest commentary and real humor. But let's talk about service. You served for 10 years? Then you decided the royal life was too hard and ran away to California to make Netflix deals and complain about your family on television. The audience stirred. Some laughed nervously while others sat in stunned silence. This was not going according to anyone's script. Harry's voice rose. Ran away? I made a choice to protect my family from a toxic environment. I made a choice to build something meaningful instead of cutting ribbons and waving from balconies. At least I'm trying to use my platform for good, unlike certain talk show hosts who profit off division and cheap jokes. Greg's smile widened. Cheap jokes? That's rich coming from someone whose biggest accomplishment since leaving England is teaching Americans how to properly whine about their families. Tell me, Prince Harry, what exactly have you built? Because from where I sit, it looks like you've built a career out of complaining about the very institution that gave you everything you have. Everything I have? Harry stood up slightly in his chair. I earned my place in this world. I've worked for everything meaningful in my life. Unlike you, I don't need to tear people down to build myself up. I don't need to spread lies and hatred to make a living. Lies and hatred? Greg's voice remained steady, but his eyes hardened. I tell the truth, Harry. Sometimes the truth hurts. The truth is you abandoned your duty, abandoned your family, and abandoned your country because life got a little difficult. Then you moved to America and started lecturing us about how we should live while living off the very royal status you claim to have rejected. The camera caught Harry's jaw clenching. His hands gripped the arms of his chair. You don't know what you're talking about. You have no idea what my family went through, what we sacrificed, what we endured. The British press, the institution, they were destroying us. We had to leave. Had to leave? Greg shook his head. Nobody made you leave, Harry. You chose to leave. You chose to air your family's private business on international television. You chose to write a book attacking the same people who raised you and supported you your entire life. Those were choices, not necessities. Harry's voice cracked slightly. They were survival choices. We were being attacked, lied about, ignored. The institution cared more about protecting themselves than protecting us, particularly protecting my wife. Your wife? Greg nodded slowly. Let's talk about that. You married an American actress who knew exactly what she was getting into when she married into the royal family, but somehow it was everyone else's fault when the fairy tale didn't match reality? Don't you dare. Harry's voice turned ice cold. Don't you dare talk about my wife. You don't know her. You don't know what she went through. The racism, the lies, the complete lack of support from people who should have protected her. Greg leaned back in his chair. I'm not talking about her character, Harry. I'm talking about expectations versus reality. Every person who marries into any famous family faces scrutiny, but most people don't run to Oprah Winfrey and throw their new family under the bus when things get tough. The studio audience was completely silent now. Even the production crew seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this train wreck continue. Harry's breathing was visible, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to maintain composure. Under the bus? Harry's voice rose again. We told our truth. We shared our experience. We gave people a chance to understand what really happens behind palace walls. That's not throwing anyone under the bus. That's called honesty. Greg's laugh was sharp. Honesty? You accused your family of racism on international television without providing any evidence or context. You suggested your father cut you off financially, conveniently leaving out that you're a grown man who should be financially independent. You painted yourself as a victim while sitting in a multi-million-dollar mansion in California. That's not honesty, Harry. That's manipulation. Harry shot to his feet. Manipulation? I shared my pain. I shared my struggle. I tried to help people understand that even princes can suffer, that even royal families have problems. I tried to humanize an institution that desperately needs humanizing. By destroying it? Greg remained seated, but his voice carried new intensity. By attacking the queen who raised you? By embarrassing your father on the world stage? By making your brother choose between supporting you and supporting the crown? That's how you humanize something? By burning it down? I didn't destroy anything, Harry's voice echoed through the studio. I spoke my truth. I protected my family. I did what any husband and father would do when his loved ones are under attack. Greg finally stood up, matching Harry's energy. No, Harry. What any husband and father would do is handle family problems within the family. What any decent person would do is have difficult conversations privately, not sell them to the highest bidder. What you did was take your personal grievances and turn them into a global spectacle for profit. The two men stood facing each other across the desk, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The cameras caught every micro-expression, every clenched fist, every labored breath. Harry's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. For profit? You think this was about money? You think I wanted to air my family's business in public? I did what I had to do because the institution left me no choice. They hung us out to dry, Greg. They fed us to the wolves. They fed you to the wolves? Greg's voice was incredulous. Harry, you were protected your entire life. You had security, staff, homes, money, status, everything handed to you. And when the media attention got uncomfortable, when your wife realized royal life wasn't all tiaras and red carpets, you both decided the whole system was corrupt rather than learning to navigate it like everyone else in your family has for decades. Harry's hands were shaking now, his royal composure completely shattered. Navigate it? You mean smile and wave while they print lies about my wife? You mean stand by quietly while they compare her to my dead mother in the most vicious ways possible? You mean pretend everything is fine while the people who are supposed to protect us throw us to the media wolves for their own benefit? Greg's eyes flashed. Your dead mother? Really, Harry? You're going to invoke Princess Diana to justify your behavior? Your mother faced far worse media scrutiny than your wife ever did, and she handled it with grace and dignity. She didn't run away. She didn't abandon her duties. She didn't sell out her family for Netflix money. Don't you dare compare them! Harry slammed his palm on the desk, the sound echoing through the stunned studio. My mother died because of media harassment. She died because the institution failed to protect her. I was not going to let history repeat itself. The audience gasped audibly. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This had moved far beyond a typical late-night interview into something raw and deeply personal. Greg remained calm, his voice steady. Your mother died in a car accident, Harry. A tragic accident that happened because her driver was intoxicated and driving recklessly while being chased by photographers. That's not the same thing as facing negative press coverage about your lifestyle choices. It's exactly the same thing. Harry's voice cracked with emotion. The relentless pursuit, the invasion of privacy, the lies and speculation printed as fact. They hounded her until she couldn't breathe, just like they were doing to us. I saw the signs, Greg. I recognized the pattern. I was not going to lose my wife the way I lost my mother. Greg shook his head slowly. But you didn't just leave quietly to protect your family, did you, Harry? You could have stepped back from royal duties and lived a private life. Instead, you've spent the last 3 years doing interviews, writing books, making documentaries, all focused on attacking the very people you claim drove you away. How is that protecting your family? Harry began pacing behind his chair, his movements jerky and agitated. Because silence didn't work. Quiet dignity didn't work. Playing by their rules, keeping our mouths shut, that only made things worse. They took our silence as permission to print whatever lies they wanted. At least now, people hear our side of the story. Your side of the story, Greg repeated. But what about their side? What about your father's side? Your brother's side? Your grandmother's side? You've told the world your version of events, but you've never given them a chance to respond properly, have you? You ambush them in interviews and books, then act surprised when they don't engage in a public mud fight. Harry stopped pacing and whirled around. They have the entire British press as their mouthpiece. They have centuries of institutional power behind them. They don't need to defend themselves because they have an army of people who do it for them. Or maybe, Greg said quietly, they don't defend themselves because they're following the royal motto. You know, the one you were raised with. Never complain, never explain. Maybe they're showing the kind of dignity and restraint that royal family members are supposed to show. Dignity? Harry laughed bitterly. You call it dignified to hang your own son out to dry? You call it dignified to refuse to correct lies about your daughter-in-law? You call it dignified to let the media destroy a young mother's mental health rather than spend any of their precious political capital defending her? Greg leaned forward. I call it dignified to handle family problems privately. I call it dignified to work through difficult situations without running to television cameras. I call it dignified to remember that being royal means putting the institution above your personal feelings. The institution? Harry's voice turned mocking. Always the institution. The institution is more important than people's lives, right, Greg? The institution is more important than mental health, than happiness, than basic human decency. That's exactly the toxic thinking that drove us away. The institution, Greg said firmly, is what gave you everything you have. Your title, your status, your platform, your wealth, your ability to make a difference in the world. Without that institution, you're just another rich guy in California with opinions. The institution made you who you are, Harry, whether you want to admit it or not. Harry's face went white with rage. The institution didn't make me who I am. My experiences made me who I am. My military service made me who I am. My work with veterans and mental health and AIDS activism made me who I am. I didn't need a crown or a title to care about people. But you needed the crown and title to get people to listen when you cared, Greg shot back. You needed the royal platform to launch your charitable work. You needed the media attention that comes with being a prince to make your causes matter. And now you're using that same royal status to attack the people who gave it to you. That's not just hypocritical, Harry. That's ungrateful. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Harry stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for a response. The studio was so quiet you could hear the camera equipment humming. Ungrateful, Harry repeated slowly. You think I'm ungrateful for not wanting my wife to suffer the way my mother suffered? You think I'm ungrateful for refusing to pretend everything is fine when it's not? You think I'm ungrateful for trying to modernize an outdated, racist institution? I think you're ungrateful for biting the hand that fed you, Greg said bluntly. I think you're ungrateful for taking everything good about your royal status while rejecting all the responsibilities that come with it. I think you're ungrateful for using your privileged platform to attack people who can't fight back without looking petty. Harry's voice turned dangerously low. Can't fight back? They've been fighting back through their surrogates in the press for years. Every time we try to tell our story, suddenly there are convenient leaks about how hurt the family is, how disappointed they are, how they're praying for us to come to our senses. They fight back, Greg. They just do it with plausible deniability. Or maybe, Greg suggested, they actually are hurt and disappointed. Maybe your father really is sad that his son has chosen to publicly attack the family, rather than working things out privately. Maybe your brother really does miss the relationship you used to have before you decided the media was more trustworthy than your own blood. Harry slammed both hands on the desk now, leaning forward aggressively. Don't you dare lecture me about family loyalty. Where was their loyalty when we needed it? Where was their support when the press was calling my wife names and making up stories about her? Where was their protection when she was getting death threats and harassment? Greg didn't flinch. Maybe they were trying to handle it the way royal problems have always been handled. quietly, privately, without turning family business into international headlines. Maybe they were following protocols that have worked for generations, while you wanted immediate public vindication. Protocols that have worked? Harry's laugh was harsh and bitter. Protocols that killed my mother? Protocols that allowed decades of abuse and cover-ups? Protocols that prioritize image over truth, reputation over human lives? Those protocols don't work, Greg. They never worked. They just hid the damage better. The intensity in the studio had reached a breaking point. Both men were standing, facing each other across the desk like gunfighters in an old western. The audience sat transfixed, watching what felt like a genuine psychological breakdown happening in real time. Greg's voice remained steady, almost gentle now. Harry, I understand you're in pain. I understand you feel like you had to choose between your family and your wife's well-being. But destroying your relationships with everyone who raised you, attacking an institution that millions of people respect and admire, turning your personal struggles into public entertainment, that's not healing, that's revenge. Harry's eyes filled with tears, but his voice stayed strong. It's not revenge, it's justice, it's accountability. It's making sure that what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. Someone has to speak up, Greg. Someone has to tell the truth about how that system really works, about who it protects and who it sacrifices. And you appointed yourself as that someone, Greg observed. You decided you were the one to tear down centuries of tradition because it didn't work perfectly for you. You decided your personal experience was more important than the stability and continuity that institution provides to millions of people. Harry wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand, his composure hanging by a thread. Stability? You call covering up abuse and protecting predators stability? You call allowing racism and bullying to flourish stability? You call sacrificing innocent people to protect guilty ones stability? That's not stability, Greg. That's corruption disguised as tradition. Greg's expression hardened. Now you're just throwing around accusations without evidence. Racism? Abuse? Predators? You're talking about your own family, Harry. These are serious charges. If you have proof of actual crimes, why haven't you gone to the authorities instead of Oprah Winfrey? Because the authorities are part of the system. Harry exploded. The police, the government, the media, they're all connected. They all benefit from keeping the monarchy stable and profitable. You think they're going to investigate themselves? You think they're going to hold the institution accountable when they depend on it for legitimacy? Or maybe, Greg said coldly, you don't have actual evidence of crimes. Maybe you have hurt feelings and misunderstood conversations that you've blown up into conspiracy theories. Maybe you're so desperate to justify abandoning your duty that you've convinced yourself everyone else is evil. Harry's breathing was shallow now, his face flushed red. Misunderstood conversations? They asked about my son's skin color before he was born. They worried about how dark he might be. How was that misunderstood, Greg? How do you misunderstand racism? Who asked? Greg leaned forward intently. Give me a name. Give me a date. Give me context. Because making vague accusations about unnamed family members, having private conversations, isn't evidence, Harry. It's gossip. And using your mixed race, wife, and children as weapons in your war against your family is disgusting. The accusation hit Harry like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his face going pale. Weapons? You think I'm using my family as weapons? I'm protecting them. I'm defending them. I'm making sure the world knows what we went through. You're exploiting them, Greg said ruthlessly. You're taking private family moments, private conversations, private struggles, and turning them into content for your media empire. Your wife's mental health struggles, your children's privacy, your family's most intimate moments, it's all become material for your next interview, your next book, your next documentary. Harry shook his head frantically. No. We share our story to help people. We talk about mental health to break stigmas. We discuss racism to create awareness. We're not exploiting anyone. We're educating people. By violating your family's privacy, Greg pressed. By sharing conversations they never consented to make public. By using your children's biracial identity as proof of your own virtue, while simultaneously claiming they're victims of the same family you're now working with Netflix to profit from. Stop it! Harry's voice cracked completely. Just stop! You don't understand what it's like. You don't know what it feels like to watch the woman you love being destroyed by people who are supposed to protect her. You don't know what it's like to see your children's futures being planned by people who see them as problems to be managed. Greg stood completely still, his voice deadly calm. I know what it's like to handle problems like an adult instead of a child. I know what it's like to work within systems instead of burning them down when they don't give me everything I want immediately. I know what it's like to take responsibility for my choices instead of blaming everyone else when life gets difficult." The words hit Harry like bullets. He grabbed the edge of the desk to steady himself, his knuckles white with tension. "You think this was a choice? You think we wanted our lives to fall apart? You think we enjoyed having to rebuild everything from scratch in a foreign country?" "I think you made choices," Greg said simply. "I think you chose to see malice where there might have been misunderstanding. I think you chose to see racism where there might have been legitimate concerns. I think you chose to see conspiracy where there might have been bureaucracy. And I think you chose to burn bridges instead of building them." Harry's laugh was broken, desperate. "Legitimate concerns about my son's skin color? What possible legitimate concern could there be about a baby's skin color, Greg? Explain that to me. Make that make sense." "I can't explain it because you won't tell us who said it, when they said it, or what the actual context was," Greg replied. "You've turned a private family conversation into an international incident without providing enough information for anyone to understand what really happened. That's not seeking justice, Harry. That's creating drama." "Creating drama?" Harry's voice rose to a near shriek. "My wife was suicidal. She was getting death threats. My children are going to grow up seeing headlines about how unwanted they were before they were even born. That's not drama. That's trauma." Greg's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. "And I'm sorry for that. Genuinely. No one should face harassment or threats. But Harry, you've been famous your entire life. Your wife knew she was marrying into the most scrutinized family on earth. The solution to media harassment isn't more media attention. It's privacy, security, and time." "Privacy?" Harry laughed bitterly. "They never gave us privacy. Every time we tried to step back, every time we tried to handle things quietly, they leaked more stories. They used our silence against us. They made us look guilty by not defending ourselves." "So you decided to defend yourselves by attacking everyone else?" Greg observed. "You decided the best way to protect your privacy was to give up your privacy completely. You traded royal scrutiny for Hollywood scrutiny, British tabloids for American media companies, family obligations for corporate contracts." Harry's whole body was shaking now. "We traded prison for freedom. We traded lies for truth. We traded being voiceless for having a platform to speak. We traded being sacrificial lambs for being in control of our own story. You traded dignity for dollars," Greg said quietly. "You traded family for fame. You traded duty for self-indulgence. And now you're standing in my studio, screaming at me because I'm pointing out what everyone else can see but nobody wants to say." The studio fell into complete silence. Harry stood frozen, his chest heaving, tears streaming down his face. For a moment, he looked exactly like what he was, a broken man who had lost everything that once defined him. "You don't know what you're talking about," Harry whispered, his voice barely audible. "You don't know anything about duty or sacrifice or family. You're just a talk show host who makes jokes about people's pain for money." Greg's smile was sad but genuine. "Maybe, but at least I'm honest about what I do. I don't pretend my entertainment is activism. I don't claim my opinions are universal truths. I don't use my personal relationships as content for my show. I just tell jokes and point out hypocrisy when I see it." "Hypocrisy?" Harry wiped his nose with his sleeve, his royal training completely forgotten. "What hypocrisy? You claim to want privacy while signing multi-million-dollar deals to share your private life. You claim to hate media attention while courting media attention constantly. You claim to want to heal your family relationships while attacking them publicly at every opportunity. You claim to be protecting your children while using their biracial identity as proof of your own victimhood." Harry stared at Greg for a long moment, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The truth of the observations seemed to hit him like physical blows, each one landing harder than the last. Harry started, then stopped. He tried again, then faltered. "The situation is," he began once more, but couldn't finish the sentence. Greg waited patiently, watching as the reality of his words sank in. The cameras captured every moment of Harry's internal collapse, the precise instant when years of justification and rationalization crumbled under the weight of simple logic. "You're wrong," Harry finally managed, but his voice carried no conviction. "You're wrong about everything. We're helping people. We're making a difference. We're building something meaningful." "What are you building, Harry?" Greg asked gently. "What exactly have you created that couldn't have been created within the royal framework? What problems are you solving that required abandoning your family and attacking your heritage?" Harry opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. His hands gestured helplessly as he struggled to find words that wouldn't come. The question hung in the air, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. "I think," Greg said slowly, "it's time for you to go." The words were quiet, almost kind, but they carried the finality of an executioner's blade. Harry's eyes widened in shock, as if he couldn't believe this was actually happening. "What?" Harry stammered. "You're kicking me off your show?" "I'm giving you a chance to leave with whatever dignity you have left," Greg replied. "Because if this continues, if you keep standing there making accusations you can't prove and justifying choices that can't be justified, you're going to say something you really regret. And unlike your family, I will respond." Harry stood frozen for another moment, the full humiliation of the situation finally sinking in. He had come onto the show expecting to be treated with deference, expecting his royal status and victim narrative to protect him from real scrutiny. Instead, he had been systematically dismantled by a comedian with a microphone. Without another word, Harry turned and walked off the set, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. The camera followed him until he disappeared into the darkness beyond the studio lights, leaving Greg alone at his desk with a live audience and millions of viewers who had just witnessed something unprecedented. Greg looked directly into the camera, his expression serious but not unkind. "Ladies and gentlemen, Prince Harry, everyone, we'll be right back after these messages." And with that, the most explosive interview in late-night television history came to an end, leaving everyone who witnessed it with the uncomfortable realization that sometimes the fairy tale doesn't have a happy ending.